Hello, everyone. I'll give you a second to get connected to sound. Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1289th New Social Environment. I'm Magley, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring James Casebere and Tom McGlynn. And now I'll introduce today's guests and hosts. James Casebere is a visual artist whose early work established him at the forefront of artists working with constructed photography. He received his BFA from the Minneapolis College of Art and Design and his MFA from Cal Arts. For almost 50 years, Casebere has devised both simple and complex tabletop models, often architectural, and photographed them in his studio. From 1986 through 1992, Casebere also made large-scale sculpture. Since receiving the Rome Prize in 2019, he has also made large-scale outdoor sculptures. His work is in the collection of numerous institutions. And our host today, Tom McGlynn, is an artist and writer based in the New York City area. He also currently teaches at Parsons or the New School. In June 2024, he had his first one-person exhibition in Europe at Toto Gallery in Ghent, Belgium. He opened his fourth solo exhibition at Rick Wester Fine Art in New York City in October 2025. His work is represented in numerous national and international collections, and we're lucky to have Tom as an editor-at-large at the Brooklyn Rail, where he has contributed articles and criticism since 2012. And with that, I will hand it over to Tom to get us started.
Thanks, Magali. It's a great pleasure to have James Casebere here. I've long admired his work, and the occasion in this instance is James's fantastic show at the space in Williamsburg called the Williamsburg Biannual. This is a space designed by JAZ Architects, but it's also it's an exhibition space that almost perfectly suits James's work in terms of how complex it is, and it's also an interesting show in the sense that James is introducing some of his newest sculptures, which are really interesting, and I look forward to getting into that later on with James. James is known as somebody who's coming out of the pictures generation in the 80s, and the sense that the photograph is the primary artifact rather than a documentation of the artifact. And so James has developed a kind of a whole phantasmagoria of these imagined spaces, and the show contains a nice range of the work from the 80s till now. And so we'll just get started, and good to have you here, James.
Thank you
for
hosting me.
So,
yeah, great to be here.
So I mean, maybe we can talk about the newest sculpture and then like go back. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that'd be fine. I just
Okay.
want to correct the one error I found in the whole slideshow is up right now. It's the date for this photograph is actually, I think it was 1983, not 2023. We're 40 years off in attribution somehow. But anyway, but yeah, I'd be happy wherever you want to start. Sounds good.
Well, I mean, since the exhibit features these in a pretty big way in the ground floor, and they have such a presence, and they're so mysterious. I mean, I have some ideas about them when I first saw them, but maybe you can introduce us to how you made them and some of your ideas behind them.
Sure. Do you want me to simply start talking about it?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, I had done an exhibition in New York called On the Water's Edge, which opened in December of 2019. But prior to doing that show and leaving New York for Rome, I found myself getting just enamored of the whole process of designing these objects that were for photographs, and they were architectural. But I'd kind of moved away from quoting or referencing historic sites and architecture towards inventing things that may have been influenced by other architects, but I found myself thinking a lot more about structure and the future rather than the past, essentially, and sort of moved into this notion of dealing with contemporary architecture, I guess. But this was the first piece that I did, and it kind of resulted from just playing with some basic forms that I found, in this case, from a Japanese architect, an apartment building in Tokyo. And I really kind of deconstructed it. It was a 3-story apartment building. And I took the lower level, which is what you see on the far left here, with this almost like a ramp going up. And I just started building more and combining it with some connecting forms to create this sprawling. I was thinking kind of of synthetic nature in a way. I mean, because I felt like it did have this sense of growth, and it seemed to suggest animal or plant life or crystalline, replication, that kind of thing, which is not a way of ordering things that's unfamiliar to artists or architects, particularly maybe in the 50s. But anyway, this was sort of the first structure I generated, and I built it out of foam core initially, just on a small scale, and then a white foam core, and then black foam core, and then there was a lot of digital work done to standardize the shapes and make it possible to replicate in wood. So it's made of burnt bamboo plywood in this kind of Japanese way of preserving. This is interesting because we could see the piece on the lower level from the entrance to the galleries. And that was one thing about the complexity of that space. I really enjoyed being able to have these perspectives, and also kind of just the flow of traffic, pedestrian traffic, and when you're in the gallery, passageways. And
yes, can we go back to the previous slide?
yeah.
This almost looks like one of your constructs, in
Yeah.
terms of the lighting, and there's something so fascinating about that space in relation to your work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed placing things in relation to the structure and finding relationships between images and the surroundings, or the sculpture and the surroundings. I mean, this is a vertical piece that's somewhat totemic, and it seems quite small here. It's like in the still that you saw after this initially, with the plywood background, that was a space I have for storage. And
the next slide, I think.
Yeah, this. So it's about 8 feet tall, and
this one's a little bit different in terms of like the sprawl. It's more like it's more reminiscent of Brancusi's column in terms of its formal structure. The previous sculpture is kind of sprawling organically, like you said. And also the titles of these pieces, Shu Sugi Ban, refers to the scorched surfaces.
Yeah.
So they're not painted, they're actually burnt,
Correct.
which is so fascinating. It's a preservation technique in Japanese, traditional Japanese architecture. Um,
Yeah.
the other thing I did think about in terms of precedents, not necessarily directly, was Tony Smith's sculpture. If we can go to that image of the Tony Smith at the end of the slideshow. Uh,
Mm.
and you know, they're different. They're very different, but he had this whole concept of dynamic symmetry is kind of generated via natural unfolding and extension. So I did think about his work not as referential, but in terms of like procedure. Although they're quite different in terms of surface. This is steel. Yours is very organic.
Mhm.
And then, you know, and also there's an interesting slide if we can look at that in relation to one of your photographs, which is called Sea of Ice, I believe. So one of those sculptures, yeah. So yeah, so this is you had an interesting story when I first talked to you about this piece,
Mhm.
James, with regards to its origins in a Caspar David Friedrich painting.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about this, but maybe you can recount that, like how Friedrich actually came to make this image, or not this image, it's your image, but
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
source.
Yeah. I think it was actually a commission in his case. And I think we're talking about the 1830s, but so he was really one of the first landscape painters, I think, where landscape itself was the subject. But this was an attempt to document the sinking of a ship called Hope, um, and that had run aground on an iceberg in the North Pole. And so he, not having ever gone there, and I don't think there were photos of this event, he would look at the Rhine, I guess, and some of the ice there. But he pretty much invented this image, which I became really enamored of because I'm kind of doing the same thing with my photographs. I'm not documenting things. I'm altering them if they have a source, and oftentimes just inventing things from scratch. So I just embraced this affinity that I felt. But I also was thinking about the way the same thing can have one reading in one context and another reading in another. So as I understand it, when he made this painting, it took on all kinds of significance in terms of the political situation in Germany at the time. And of course, for audiences in our moment, we're going to be thinking about uh, climate change and the melting of the polar ice caps. So I I liked that. I like the way we sort of can imbue an image with meaning um, as time changes and as the viewer changes. You know.
So when we look at this image, James, this image to me is the most seamless in terms of like its origins and fabricated in the studio. What are we looking at? Like, you know, if you don't mind taking us behind the scenes in terms of, well, like, how did you fabricate this? Um, is that like no seam in the background there, like no seam paper?
Uh,
Because this looks so much like what we know of the Friedrich image.
yeah. Do we have a still of the model under construction? I feel like it was part of this group of images when we put the slideshow together.
I don't know if we do. I don't know.
Oh, maybe
Um,
it's not there. Okay.
I don't think no. I think we don't. Can we look at the image in relation to the sculpture? There should be an installation shot of that image in relation to the sculpture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this is such an interesting juxtaposition, and I know it was just kind of serendipitous they don't directly relate to each other.
Yeah.
But there, I I watched the new Frankenstein movie last night, and
Oh,
that the Caspar David Friedrich image. I think it's called The Wreck of the Hope, or
that was one
the,
of the
the
titles for the painting.
right. That was like the first shot in the movie.
Hmm.
So it's like self-consciously representing, the 19th century idea of the Arctic, which is like terra incognita. It's underdetermined. It's the place where anything can happen, and it's the denouement of Mary Shelley's story too, which led me to think about the sublime, and led me to think about ideas of the sublime. And when I actually first encountered your sculptures, I thought of these as kind of like unknowable sublime images in terms of not in terms of scale, but in terms of like the mathematical sublime, Kant's mathematical sublime, which extends forever. There's a sense in these sculptures that they can just continually mutate and grow. And I just thought that was such an interesting relation to, the Frankenstein thing too, because of the artificiality of that, the artificiality of the monster,
Mhm.
uh, tying it all together with like the artificiality of your setups in the studio, and then the presentation of them as mise en scene, the photograph becoming the primary artifact.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, I
which
think the process for making these sculptures was pretty intuitive, and I think that's what I liked about it. Both with the outdoor piece I did in Chatham and with these, it was about a lot of playfulness with the form and just kind of using my imagination and letting things go wherever they took me. Um,
some of the extensions also, I mentioned this earlier, they remind me of actual Japanese joinery, which is very complex. It's not simple mortise and tenon, but it's like these very complex geometric forms that fit into one another and then click like in this very kind of sophisticated way. So those extensions are very articulated, um, in my view, which again leads me towards what you were saying about like a science fictional space, or aesthetic, a science fictional aesthetic where this thing is just mutating, and the extensions are, just these sophisticated mutations. That's a great installation shot too, of how your work interacts with the space.
yeah, that was at T Space in Rhinebeck, Stephen Hall's.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't note there was an exterior window in the basement in Williamsburg.
No, we
Uh,
brought some of the close-ups from that exhibition um, because they are close-ups because you see more of the object than the space
it's
around.
just a great shot. Maybe we can segue to the photographs, the image called Stairs,
Mhm.
which is also in the basement. So we'll go from the basement to the top floor, I guess. Um, this is a fairly new image from 20. It says 2026. Oh, 20, is this 2024? Yeah.
Yeah,
So there's this other thing that starts creeping into your photographs, which is like this flooding. I guess that turns up like in the early 90s or something, or
late 90s.
late 90s.
Yeah.
And Hal Foster talks about it as kind of like a biblical apocalyptic, after the flood or during the flood type of metaphor. For me, when I first saw this image, I thought of like Ursat's American versions of like the Cinque Terre in Florida. like I thought of them as another multiple layers of simulation. Um, but the color too, the color in this is it adds another layer of kind of cultural association for me. Um, Almost less like like a kind of like a fake Mediterranean ersatz Mediterranean condo development or something. That's just my take, but maybe you can let us know what you were thinking.
Well, um, this may be the only photograph in the exhibition, if I'm not mistaken, that was actually made after the sculpture. And it was part of this exhibition I did at Sean Kelly in summer 2024. Um, but the structure itself is based on a housing complex in India, designed by Balkrishna Doshi, and it was, I think it's like terracotta in color, in fact, but the structure itself was not too different from this. I At that point, I was kind of looking at contemporary architects who were engaged in projects that were um, like CO2 neutral or um, sustainable in some sense. And in this case, it was affordable housing. But I also appreciated the fact that it was designed with the intention of allowing tenants or owners, if it wasn't rented, to decorate them as they wish and to sort of complete the work through color and additions and things like that. So I took that as a permission to go ahead and dramatically change the color to accent and to create this palette of my own, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
It was fun and uplifting. And I think so. These were based on some drawings that he did, which were actually very subdued and two-dimensional. But yeah, I just wanted to dramatize the moment, I suppose, with climate change on people's minds as sort of the backdrop of everything at that point, our consciousness, I guess. But I did this with a few other contemporary architects, like Francis Carey in Africa, and I used this was a tech school that he did. I think that school was in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
Or there's a Pakistani architect who was designing stoves for poor people to move the cooking outside from the in order
Mm-hmm.
to deal with problems of lung disease and flooding. So it kind of would start with these places and buildings as an inspiration and then improvise.
Well, that makes me think, forgive me if I was interpreting these in terms of like a negative dystopic simulacra, but it brings me to a discussion of your work relative to a political situation. I mean, in a lot of your work, there's a political meta narrative going on, which yeah, I mean, it seems very responsive to current situations like climate change, and I mean, I even interpreted some of those sculptures as kind of like a dark, kind of melancholic response to our current situation in the United States. Of course, it's kind of conceded to interpret everything via kind of like a United States aesthetic, you know. So it's interesting to hear that this is like an international project.
Yeah.
In the same like juxtaposed with this image, there's another image of a house on stilts.
Mhm.
If we can take a look at that, it's It's also a very colorful image.
There's a couple of them. Let's see. You
Yeah,
think
yeah, it's
Blue
not,
House?
well, we can, it's the one, yeah, it's got a, that's it, yeah, that's it. I mean, there's a lot of humor in your work as well. It's kind of a dark humor. Um, this construct looked like it's kind of screaming, you know. There's a kind of a really witty anthropomorphic aspect to this. But again, there's the flood, and was this also based on
Uh,
a real architectural situation?
yeah, it's based on a very early house by Herzog and de Meuron in France, close to the Swiss border. But it was a gray cast concrete building, so color was not a part of it. So I added the color and the water. Um, but it is elevated on a platform similar to that.
And the color is it's red, yellow, and blue, so it's like a primary triad. Um, there's also there's a generic aspect to your work. There's a will towards the vernacular, and I think from my point of view, it doesn't come off as reductive, but it comes off as kind of expansive and generative, ironically, paradoxically. This whole idea that the vernacular and the generic can be a vehicle for, you know, like political comment and like you mentioned, and you know, some of your previous work, like the prisons, if we can like take a look at those in the show. There's one right there. Yeah. That's not, no, that's I'm sorry.
Before, yeah, ones.
There's one right, just the slide just before that. Well, this is Piranesi, but this is one of your earlier works, referring to I guess the Panopticon prison, because
Yeah,
it's a circle.
yeah.
And you had an anecdote about the inception of these works in your studio.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to share that, or?
Sure. I was just thinking about this being, yes, it's a panopticon, but it's also based on a panopticon in Richmond, Virginia, that was, I think it was kind of co-designed between Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Latrobe, and that was my understanding. And I know that he brought a lot of his drawings over from France with him. But so there was an actual place that this resembles in Virginia. But yeah, I think it's this notion that, you know, it seems as though when my work is successful, it's because there's some kind of confluence between the social and the personal or psychological. And so, I mean, at this point in the early 90s, I suppose, feeling a little trapped myself in my own method of making things from cardboard and foam core and whatnot. That I was feeling a little bit trapped, and so when I started making the prison images, it grew out of a number of things, but it seemed to encapsulate the way I felt, that it was also the height of this prison construction boom that was very concerning to me. So, and it was after the Foucault thing, and I don't mean to discount Foucault and his ideas, but I was really thinking a lot about the contemporary political situation, the kind of war on crime and drugs, I guess, and how it manifested itself in widespread incarceration, mostly people of color. But yeah, but it also resonated for me because of how I felt as this, you know, how I looked at this idea of the isolated artist in the studio building things, which could sort of be a way to describe like these manic model building, like model train enthusiasts. You know, I had, in fact, when I started making models, it was not because I'd always been infatuated with models. It was, I I was doing things fairly simply, but I was aware of the fact that I felt like I was creating this character who made this work. That this persona was like a lonely guy, lonely middle-aged man, obsessed with creating his own world and controlling it. But that's not how I really felt about what I was doing. It just felt like it had that charge, it sort of represented that. Um, so
I love that anecdote because it's so honest in terms of like often what happens in the studio and like the inception of an idea can actually be like your literal situation, you know. And it made me think of Smithson's idea of cultural, I forget what he called it, cultural confinement. And he was specifically talking about artists in their studios, you
mhm,
know. And I think it's so interesting to think about how one as an artist connects their ontological reality to the larger social scheme. And of
mhm,
course, now we're seeing, an intense acceleration of that uh, carceral state with Trump and ICE and all of these new facilities that are being built. So your work seems topical at the time, but also very prescient of what's going on now.
mhm.
Maybe it's just a constant in American culture, um, unfortunately.
When I started this project with the prisons, I kind of identified 9 types of prisons that evolved historically, and they all developed in America pretty much. I mean, Bentham's notorious for this panopticon, but there was the radial prison, like in Philadelphia. There's a telephone pole model, a campus model, a high rise, and so I started out by trying to render the exteriors, and once I'd done that, I moved inside and started working with uh, the individual prison cells. This is called Georgian jail cages, and these were uh, they were mobile jail cages basically for transporting prisoners to plantations that you know post Civil War, and you know again people of color, black folks primarily, could be rounded up for loitering and put to work, rented by the states to plantations, basically, to do the labor they've been doing before. Um,
Can we look at the larger image?
yeah.
Yeah. So this is fascinating to me also in terms of, again, going back to the vernacular. You have I forget what it's called,
Yeah.
lap siding and then the lattice. So those are both like architectural reference to American vernacular. But at this, like, what that lattice might be under some Midwestern porch, or the lap siding might refer to like colonial Williamsburg. But in this instance, like you're using the vernacular almost against its kind of comfortable feeling. I mean, it might have actually been used for those prisons. I'm not sure about your models, but for me, when I read this, I read through the vernacular towards what the implications of that cladding of the vernacular, or the vernacular cladding of like the real situation, which is incarceration and mobile incarceration. Um, Really fascinating. So the originals of these would date to the 1870s, I guess.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just a fascinating image, I think, in terms of its noir qualities too. I mean, we talked about your color, but your lighting is so cinematically dramatic. Uh, Makes me think about films like Night of the Hunter, you
Mhm.
know. or all these Southern noir, this post-war Southern noir uh, uh, genre, like To Kill a Mockingbird. The filmic aspect of those.
Mhm.
Um, so maybe we can go to some of the earlier work to see the genesis of James's uh, fabrication process. Why don't we go to the very beginning? Um,
Do you want to go to those three images in a row that are two?
yeah, why don't we do that? Are they all together, James?
Yeah, I think there's an image right there. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So these are very early. These are from the 70s, right? Or 70s to 80s?
Yeah, the one on the left is the earliest, and that was like 1976.
Uh-huh.
And
And this was that made when you were in college in Minnesota?
I had graduated and was living like in downtown Minneapolis in this 2,000 square foot warehouse for a studio, but making these tiny models on one fold-up table. But
But they're fascinating. I mean, and also this image I found really fascinating in relation to the sculptures too, because you have this kind of like, again, this concreted, mysterious image in the center of the room just floating there. It's totally phantasmagorical. But it made me think of also that, the kind of science fiction aspect of the sculpture, of the newest sculpture. So
mhm.
while you might not see it developmentally connected, it's like, to me, it's like very interesting to see how your father's Boy Scout scarf, or the copy of it, is just suspended in the middle of this kind of domestic situation. It's just interesting to see how artists, there's a persistence of vision in your work.
Yeah.
And
I mean, this is based on a dream, and that's exactly what happened in the dream. So I had this scarf of my father's that I would wear all the time until I wore it out. It was threadbare. I mean, and he had died the year before, so this is kind of like wish fulfillment, I guess. But it was also for me about like carrying on his legacy. That was the kind of feeling I was left with. He died. He was 54, I guess, or no, or 56. He was 56 when he died. So he was pretty young, and I was 23. And he he was a member at one point of the Democratic Socialist Party of America in the 1930s, and but he grew up in a little planned socialist community in Alabama, actually.
wow.
And he went to something that went down in a lot of educational history books for being innovative, which was a school called the Organic School in this town called Fairhope. And so he had this kind of leftist background, and he was an idealistic educator who built a couple of schools, and he was all into the open school concept.
Was he an architect? Was he an architect, James?
No, he wasn't an architect, but he did build two. Well, I guess he would have gone from one new school to another like three times in the Detroit area, where he hired the faculty from scratch and developed the curriculum.
So he was a Southerner who went north.
Yeah, and in fact, this little town was also like a resort town for Northerners. It was kind of bizarre that way. It was next to Mobile, on Mobile Bay.
Uh-huh.
And so his parents had moved down there during the Depression when they couldn't make a living up in Michigan. But anyway, so there was I sort of cherished his attitudes, I guess, and approach to a lot of things. So when he died, that's kind of the legacy I took with me. So that energy, the positive energy I wanted to
Uh-huh.
Propel me to be an artist, I guess. That's kind of
It's a wonderful image. Can we look at the boat's image?
Yeah.
Um,
So these three kind of encapsulate different orientations. This one was personal, but it's also about film and Hitchcock specifically, because I don't know if it was really initially based on this movie called Lifeboat, but
Right.
I watched it while I was building the model.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's this beautiful movie about people getting trapped on this lifeboat during World War II when the Nazis had sunk a ship. And anyway,
Yeah, I
it's a
think
wonderful drama.
Tallulah Bankhead is in that, right? She's a
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, she's a rich woman.
yeah.
Yeah, and
It's a great cast. Yeah.
it is a great cast. And anyway, this Nazi climbs on board from another ship that sank, and there's a whole drama around how they survive at sea. But I was interested in also living downtown near South Street Seaport. I had beautiful views of the harbor, and the buildings around me started to take on the character of boats. And so, having been influenced by Robert Venturi and thinking about the postmodern, um, I I uh, I was thinking about pictorial convention, I guess. And so this was my conventional adaptation of like a watercolor of sailboats on the harbor, except that it was meant to suggest this tension between the individual and the social, like the big social forces surrounding you um, and being alone in this boat by yourself. So that, I was trying to just get at this relationship between the self and the social context, I guess. And that became a kind of theme in my work for a long time.
Hmm. Well, the analogy or the metaphor in the Hitchcock film is that we're all in the same boat, and everybody has like different ideas about how to steer the boat. Like when the Nazi gets on, he wants to like order everybody around, right?
Yeah.
Um, but then there's happenstance that happens, and so rather than an ocean, you actually have kind of like the constructed environment that you responded to. Um, but there's still like I guess there's an aspect of it, like kind of an existentialist kind of like the boat in the foreground, and there's kind of awkward oars too. The oars almost feel like cartoony um, in terms of their chunkiness.
Yeah, I think that actually early on, I was always sort of responding to the influence of cartoons, that there is this interest in animation. I wouldn't say it has been consistent, but that aesthetic, I guess, of the um, fabricated out of paper, you know. So, for example, there's another photograph I did around the time of, well, before the scarf image, which was um, really about this confusion between animation and reality. Getting up early in the morning and watching these 1930s cartoons in black and white, mice dancing on piano keys to classical music, like that. Really, it's kind of like the image bank that I'm growing up with, and so there
I
is.
can recall those too. I mean, they were like Max Fleischer cartoons, and they were very surreal. There's like cats and dogs coming out of the wall, and like they were very surreal. The early animations. So there is an aspect of the surreal to your work as well.
Mhm. Yeah, there was one morning when I was sure that I don't know whether I'd fallen asleep, but I was sure that mice actually came out from behind the TV and ran across the floor, disappearing under the couch beneath me. And I don't know whether it was a dream or whether it was real, but to this day. So I was just interested in that confusion. And it happens to me today too, quite frequently, as I pay attention to my dreams, or fall asleep.
Well,
Yeah.
well, the other interesting thing about, our current situation is that, back in the 80s, the Baudrillard's book Simulations was really popular in the sense of like a mediated reality, but what we're dealing with now, is so much more hyper real than that ever was. So that our reference to the real. So this is totally interesting. It's very interesting to look at uh, photographers like, people from the pictures generation, in terms of the interpretation of the virtual and the interpretation of the simulacrum, with regards to dealing with the digital, hyper real that we're currently dealing with. So I mean, the work is perennially relevant, considering our situation, considering our digital situation. And I actually wondered if your sculptures, your newest sculptures, which are very, they're very tactile and phenomenological, or somewhat of a reaction to the kind of the overdetermined virtual world that we're navigating these days.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think they were also, I'm just looking back. I mean, the post-production on the photographs got pretty prolonged as time went on, and there would be things I would just leave things unfinished in the model. We'd fix it in Photoshop, that kind of thing. So that, but there was a point where I just really wanted to spend the time and attention with the models themselves and the forms I was creating. So even before the pandemic, I was headed in that direction. So when I went to Italy, I didn't really bring my camera at all. I just wanted to look at the sculpture and the architecture and, build things. So
This is when you had the residency in Rome in 2019.
yeah,
It was the American Academy in Rome.
yeah. And then the pandemic hit and we had to come home. But, even it sort of reinforced that desire to be connected to real stuff, because there was such a drive to communicate online and to do everything online. I just wanted to be here now, so to speak.
Right.
So
Can we stick on this image for a bit? Maybe the larger version of this image.
yeah.
So this is what you're kind of talking about. Like, this image to me doesn't look like it has a whole lot of post-production, but it feels very kind of phenomenal. Like it feels like plaster over, foam. Like the smooth edges of everything feels very kind of like fluid.
Mhm.
Is this what you're talking about in terms of like moving from these kind of fabrications to models that are a little more sophisticated with like Photoshop post-production?
Yeah, I think there's another thing that happened though. Like this was all built out of cardboard, and I think hot glue. I discovered hot glue maybe at this point, but yeah, it's basically plaster and cheesecloth maybe, and then joint compound over it. But I could build all this myself, and I shot this in front of a window, so that's actually daylight coming through. But um,
And
what's the point?
how big would this be? Like how big a model? Like literally how big was this?
Oh, it's probably like 36 inches square, maybe, and 24 inches high, something in that vicinity, which is pretty typical for a lot of the things I built as models. Uh, but since you mentioned color, there was another thing that occurred when I switched to color. It was kind of an accident because of changing technology. But when I started shooting color almost because I had to. I was doing transparencies for commercial light boxes, and it was very difficult to make a color print from black and white negative. So I would shoot this black and white model in color film, and there'd be little glimpses of color from a copper wire or something showing up, which I really enjoyed. So I took those first images, which were the prison exteriors, became my first color prints. Rather than doing the light boxes, I just started making color prints. And And the color grew from the prisons. So it was really after the prisons that I started adding both color and motion and texture in a way that was going to be less about deprivation and absence and more about a kind of overflow, literally, and sensuous experience. So I don't know. That's just a side note, I suppose, in what you were asking.
Maybe we can segue to one of the later colored images. Maybe the vacation house on stilts, or that's a good one. How about that kind of generic Americana situation here?
Yeah.
You were doing these very complicated. I don't know if it's represented here, but this looks like one from that version where it looked like you were flying over, and there were like looked like almost hundreds of like, tract houses or like Levittown type houses with very colorful images. So this is the same period, correct?
Yeah. This was sort of at the tail end of that. A lot of those were about the mortgage crisis and the kind of lifestyle people were living. It was also my rediscovery of the suburbs, having grown up there and left, and then finding it again in upstate New York, like as I traveled around to actually take a look. And so I was just interested in the way these neighborhoods developed and the kind of eclecticism. But this image was done actually specifically for the New York Times Magazine cover and to illustrate a debate between the Republican and Democratic economic advisors at the time. And I guess it was Obama. So there's so much sky because it had a title across the top. It said "Boom or Doom." And
was that like it was after 2008 crash, I guess.
Yeah.
So it was like on the verge of his second administration, I guess.
Can't remember the dates. I think it was around, the photograph was probably, it says 2013. Okay. So that's later than I thought.
I mean, this image, again, going back to the generic and the American vernacular, it has so many different associations for me. It makes me think of American Gothic, even though that's not particularly Gothic architecture there.
Yes.
So, I mean, the interesting thing for me about your work, James, is the layers of association, given like the generic quality of your subject matter is amazing. That you can actually work through this vernacular and get at something that's so rich.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
And maybe we can juxtapose this image with one of the newer images of the vacation house, which is also very colorful, but it's such a contrast. That one, but the one just after that, actually.
Yeah.
So this is a newer image from 2024 where you're working with post-production values and a lot of color. Maybe you can fill us in on your thinking on this one.
Yeah. This is actually misdated too. It's more 2018 or 19, but it's on the Water's Edge series that I did, and this particular image was based on a Paul Rudolph Florida house. So, he did all these structures that were meant to be on the water's edge so that people could connect with nature and have a light footprint, I guess. And
so 2013 would have been right after Sandy, right?
Yeah.
Were you thinking about Sandy?
Yeah. I'm not sure which came first, to tell you the truth, but.
Well, if this is 2013, then 2012, Sandy was October 2012, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about Sandy a little bit. I had some pictures that were specifically about it, and spent time bailing out friends who were on Rockaway, Breezy Point, when after the storm hit, before and after.
But this architecture almost seems to predict the necessity for, rising the house. I mean, there are houses, there is architecture like this on the Grand Banks, and I mean on the Outer Banks, and stilt architecture. But again, I think for me, like, there's a wit to these images when you socially contextualize them with regards to Sandy or uh, global warming issues. Whereas the previous image of the house on stilts and this house, this guest house, I associate with like the wealthy. I associate with like a guest house for someplace in the Hamptons or in Florida or St. Bart, where, and I think it has to do with the color. Like I think the high key color makes me think of maybe kind of like a gauche nouveau riche type of aesthetic. That's just my reading.
Yeah. The color is mine. I kind of imported it from the Caribbean or from Central America, Mexico. Paul Rudolph's color was pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm. And then you have this kind of like in the previous image of the farmhouse, you have the sky. We can stay on the guest house.
Can I leave you guys for 1 second? I have to go.
Sure.
I'll be right back. Okay, thanks.
So I think we could probably go to question. I mean, I'm going to wait for James to come back, but I think we could probably go to questions like fairly soon. I see a lot of people have some responses, and I don't necessarily want to continue this without James. So
There are a few questions that we have that are ready for the audience. If you want to ask James a question, once we turn to the Q&A, we can turn to you if you pose your question in the chat. I'll give James a second to return and then we can wrap it up.
So I can just give a shout out to the Williamsburg Biannual Space, which is a fantastic venue for looking at art. And the model is that they have only two. It's called the biannual because they have only two shows per year, one in the fall and one in the spring. And so James is the fall artist, and if you get over there, it's quite a comprehensive show of James's work, and given the architectural nature of his work, the architectural space there really complements it beautifully. You do have to make an appointment, so you should go to the website. I'm not sure if Magali posted the website in the chat, but you can do that to make an appointment. And yeah. The curator over there is Irene Shum. Hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Irene, your last name. And the space was designed by Jorge A. Zapata. And he leads a team of architects there called JAZ Architecture. they have their offices on the top floor, but the three other floors are dedicated to artists. So it's kind of a Kunsthalle. It's not a collecting institution.
So I'm back. Sorry. I think I
Welcome
got
back.
fired by a fresh air interview with the female star of Die My Love. Does anybody know her name?
Haven't seen that, no.
Jennifer Lawrence.
Yeah, in the middle of this interview, she just got up and disappeared. And but she came back. She had to take a bathroom break, and then she came back. So
That's why we love her.
pardon my absence momentarily.
It's okay. I think we were going to kind of like wrap it up a little bit, just in terms of timing, James.
Okay.
Are there any images that we didn't touch upon that you'd like to?
Well, I guess there's the Sutpen's cave image out of the.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Let's go to that. Sutpen's cave.
Yeah.
And so the backstory on that is Sutpen is a character from Faulkner's Absalon.
Yeah.
And I'll let you fill in the rest.
Well, I think if the boats image refers kind of to film, which becomes a reference oftentimes in the images, Sutpen's cave.
That's it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's in the middle. Yeah, that's it at the bottom with the cave.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
Essentially, this was kind of a key moment, maybe 2/3 of the way through the novel, where they tell the story of how Thomas Sutpen, who had created this empire, I don't know, maybe it was Mississippi.
Probably if it's Faulkner.
Yeah. So he was a poor white guy living in West Virginia. They were migrating. And his father sent him on an errand to this plantation house where he was humiliated because they sent him to the back door. And he, being poor himself, had never been to a house with a back door, with more than one door. And anyway, in his humiliation, he essentially hatched his plans to become a rich slave owner himself. And so most of the novel is about the disillusion of that empire, I guess, and if not also the creation. But I thought that it, for me, it encapsulated this moment, or it encapsulated this idea about place. That for me, somehow with my work, I was interested in place as a subject, and also this relationship between personal history and social history. And so, and how the family is interwoven with historical events and relationships, economic, racial, etc. And so that, I guess, is just the sign of that area of concern in the work.
And in the novel, I don't, is there a cave in the novel? I don't, are you referring to, you're referring to Plato's cave?
I'm not actually, but people have assumed that. But in the book, it's more like they call it a cave, but it's underneath an overturned tree. So again, this is my extrapolation or modification of the story. I just wanted to have that juxtaposition, I guess. Yeah.
Again, fascinating layers of political and aesthetics, where you're not exactly explaining the political situation. You're just presenting this kind of this juxtaposition. I mean, in the foreground, I see all this kind of underdetermined shapes, which refer to, some of your other image. And then in the background, you have this kind of overdetermined colonial, Greek revival plantation. So the juxtaposition of the two is, for me, it's like the indeterminate and the overdetermined, and then the friction that creates often, as you so well explained. Okay, well, thank you, James. I think that there are a bunch of questions in the chat. And this is the part where we open it up to the audience. And so here we go.
Thank you both so much for such a wonderful conversation. The first questions, or first couple of questions, come from Thomas Moore. I'm going to give you a chance to unmute, Thomas.
Since I don't have my question in front of me, you're probably better if you read it.
Got it. I will pull them up. So Thomas says, since your photography involves building 3D forms, you feel this newer sculpture is a sort of coming out and that it strips away the photographic layer. And well, I'll let you answer that one first, and then I'll go to the next one.
Yeah, I guess it is coming out in a way, but it's also different. I think even in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, when I was doing other large scale sculpture installations, they weren't things that I ever intended to photograph. They were parallel, but not prior to photographing. So the photographs of them are mere documents. Although the subject may have been akin to some of the photographic work I was doing at the time. So I think it's a coming out in as much as I'm showing the work that I've been doing lately that's not photography. And that the categorical assumption is that I'm a photographer. And so it may take people by surprise and a little bit of thought to understand the relationship between the two. And I mean, that's why I really jumped at this opportunity, because I could show the photographs in relation to the sculpture in a venue that was quite interesting, I guess, in a beautiful space. So I don't think I'm one or the other. I don't think artists, there is a tendency to want to channel people down one track or another, especially in relation to the market. But I've always kind of thought three-dimensionally from the beginning, hence the constructions. And so it's a natural transition for me at this time, I guess, given the changing technology and also my changing interest in form and so forth. So yeah. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
Thank you for that answer, James. The next question from Thomas is, I think your work is having a separate focus to many pictures artists. I don't think your work is preoccupied with mass media. How do you feel about this?
I don't think I'm preoccupied with mass media. I think that when I started actually making photographs of the things I constructed, it was because I was influenced by other performance artists or installation art, earth art, conceptual art, people who documented events that were temporary. And it was also after, at least partly also after reading a book called The Museum Without Walls, which was really about the effect that photography had on our perception of art. Like that, with the understanding that as a Midwesterner, most of my experience of art had been through its documentation, been through reproduction in magazines and books rather than firsthand. And so there, as a viewer, you had a different relationship, one of maybe that was more analytic than being obsessed by the aura. And this begins to take political importance as well. Just the idea that art can be democratic, it can be accessible, it can be affordable. And but I think when I started making photographs, it was this notion that the main recipients will be people seeing the work in reproduction. And why not make that the end, the primary end? So that may be a different emphasis than other pictures artists. But there's an overlap, definitely. But
Thank you for those questions, Thomas, and thank you for that answer, James. The next question comes from James Welsh, and James asks, do you have a framework for understanding dream world, unconscious spaces such as Buddhist thought and or psychotherapy? As for example, Andrea Fraser's or Andrea Fraser would incorporate such a frame into her work? Question mark.
Um, I I think that early on I was also influenced by Carl Jung and his orientation rather than a Freudian one. And when I go back into thinking about dreams, I also resort to that. I think I identify much more with the kind of Jungian approach to psychoanalysis than others, and to dream work in particular. I find it really hard to unravel the meaning in dreams, in fact, without bouncing it off of someone who understands it, has a wider, deeper understanding of symbols and myth than myself. So I tend to resort to people with a Jungian orientation.
Thank you for that answer. The next question comes from GE, and GE says, I see a profound echo of the cosmic in your work. Do you believe your models, your sculptures, and your photographs are not mere replicas, but parables of being?
I think I missed the first one of the words that you used.
I see a profound echo of the cosmic in your work. Do you believe your models, your sculptures, and your photographs are not mere replicas, but parables of being?
It's echoes of something, and that's the word I didn't get, I guess.
Of the cosmic.
Cosmic. Yeah, it's not really about it's not about reality. Like my work has never been about the real. Maybe it's about the imaginary, or maybe it's about myth, or maybe it's about history, and it's about the way we construct reality rather than reality as it is, I guess. It may be about ideas, and some of those may be cosmic, I suppose, but I wouldn't limit myself to that. I think yeah.
Thank you for that question, GE. And the last question comes from KD Sidelsky, and they ask, given how deeply architecture informs your work, did you ever consider studying architecture formally, and what drew you instead toward approaching it through art?
I don't think I ever really considered it when I was young. I think I didn't really have the science and math background that I felt like you needed to pursue architecture. I wasn't so much interested in, math and chemistry, and geometry I always loved, I must say. But engineering, I just didn't feel like I had the aptitude at the time. I might have been wrong, but I was more, even though I may not have really understood it I was more interested in art from the get-go, visual art. Yeah.
Thank you for that answer, James. And that wraps up our Q&A. Thank you, James, and thank you, Tom. I'd also like to thank Irene and Kelly, Irene from the Williamsburg Biennial and Kelly from James's studio. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rail's YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. The Rail will be closed tomorrow for Veterans Day, so join us for a special virtual screening presented with our friends at the Filmmakers Cooperative of Star Spangled to Death by Ken Jacobs. And as is Rail tradition, you can now all unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much for being here today.
Thank you,
Thank you.
James. Thanks.
Thank you so
Thank you
much,
so
James and
much.
Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Good
Thank you,
conversation.
Magley.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Everybody.
Have a good one, y'all.